there, fans of the strange, dark, and mysterious. If you're into stories that make your skin crawl and keep you up at night, then buckle up, because this one's a doozy. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Next story. Door scratch. In late October of 2019, neighbors in Ashland, Oregon started mentioning a sound that didn't match the calm streets. Reports described slow scraping on a front door, followed by silence, then a second scrape closer to the lock. Nobody agreed on what did it, and nobody could prove it ever happened at all. Caleb Wynn was 34 and worked as an overnight wildfire dispatcher for a regional office outside Medford. He rented a small duplex on the south side of Ashland, choosing it for quiet and quick highway access. He kept odd hours, slept light, and logged everything because his job trained him to trust timelines. The first scratch happened on his second night, shortly after 2 a.m. He heard it through the thin hallway, a single drag along the lower half of the door. Caleb waited, then checked the peephole and saw only porch light, glare, and wet pavement. He didn't open the door, and he didn't call anyone because it stopped after one pass. In the morning, he saw 3 pale lines in the paint, low enough to be from an animal. He photographed them, saved the file name, and wrote the time on a notepad by the stove. The landlord told him raccoons and stray dogs wandered through, especially after trash pickup. Caleb believed that explanation until he compared the marks with the gate latch outside. The gate latch sat at chest height and had fresh scuffs that looked like metal scraping metal. He asked the landlord about past tenants, and the landlord said nobody lasted long on that lease. The landlord then changed the subject and offered to repaint the door. Caleb declined the repaint and bought a cheap camera that recorded when it detected motion. He mounted it inside facing the door, aimed to catch feet and shadows under the threshold. The first week produced nothing but Caleb leaving for work and returning at dawn. Then, on the 8th night, the camera triggered at 2:12 a.m. The video showed a brief flicker of light, then the audio caught a slow scrape, and the file ended. There was no figure in frame, no paw, no shoe, no shadow moving across the floorboards. Caleb checked the camera settings and found the clip duration had defaulted to 10 seconds. He extended the duration and tested it with his own movement, and it worked normally. That same evening, he printed the still frames and pinned them beside his notes. The still frames showed only the inside of a quiet hall and a door that looked unchanged. 2 nights later, the scratching returned, longer and closer to the handle. Caleb stood behind the kitchen counter with his phone in hand, and he listened without moving. He called the non-emergency line after it stopped, and a deputy arrived 20 minutes later. Dispatch logs reportedly show the call as a noise complaint with no suspect seen. The deputy walked the porch, checked the yard, and left without writing a citation. The deputy's name was Ryan Kolish, and he was 41, assigned to Jackson County Patrol that month. He told Caleb that coyotes sometimes jumped fences and scratched when they smelled food. He also mentioned teenagers who dared each other to mess with renters, especially near Halloween. Caleb asked if similar calls came from the same block, and Kolsch said he couldn't discuss other addresses. Kolsch advised better lighting and a sturdier latch, then drove away. Caleb installed a brighter porch bulb and replaced the latch screws with longer ones. He added a rubber sweep under the door to reduce outside noise and block drafts. The changes made him feel prepared, but they also made him notice new details. When the scratch came again, it seemed to travel upward, like something rising along the wood. Caleb didn't claim it was a claw, but he noted the direction in his log. Around that time, Mara Keene entered the story for reasons that seemed unrelated. Mara was 29, an insurance adjuster from Eugene, and she drove to Ashland to review a small water damage claim. The claim involved a different duplex 2 streets away, owned by the same landlord as Caleb's unit. Mara spent a day photographing stains and measuring humidity, then asked casually about tenant turnover. The landlord reportedly joked that the neighborhood had quirks, then refused to elaborate. Mara mentioned the conversation later because she recognized Caleb's address in a shared landlord file. She and Caleb met at a coffee shop near Lithia Park, and he told her about the scratches. Mara didn't laugh, and she didn't validate anything, because her work depended on skeptical detail. She asked whether he had checked public records for prior complaints at the property. Caleb said he had not, and Mara offered to look through county archives she already accessed for claims research. Within a week, Mara found a county file from 2009 that referenced the same duplex parcel. The file was not about scratching, but it described repeated calls for forced entry at a rental unit. The summary included dates, vague outcomes, and a note that the reporting party moved out quickly. Mara also found archived notes from a local maintenance contractor mentioning door replacement more than once. Investigators never confirmed a pattern, but the paperwork existed in multiple places. Caleb asked Deputy Kolsch about the older calls, and Kolsch said older records were inconsistent. He said some reports were digitized later, and some were entered twice with different categories. Caleb requested copies through a public records portal and waited for weeks. State records eventually returned a sparse packet with missing pages and redacted names. The packet confirmed a few calls for suspicious persons, and it left out the reasons tenants felt unsafe. The scratches continued, but they didn't happen every night, which made Caleb doubt his own predictions. He tried sleeping with earplugs and missed one incident, then woke to new marks near the handle. The marks looked shallow, like something dragged a thin tool rather than a heavy claw. Caleb photographed them beside a ruler and uploaded backups to a cloud folder. He also started leaving flour on the porch to catch footprints, and the flour remained undisturbed. Mara visited the duplex in daylight, careful to avoid trespassing beyond Caleb's leased space. She examined the doorframe and noted a slight bend near the strike plate, consistent with prior force. She also found old screw holes that didn't match the current hardware, suggesting earlier latch positions. Mara said these details supported ordinary explanations like break-in attempts and repeated repairs. Caleb agreed, but he pointed out the timing, always between 2 and 3 a.m. Some locals claimed the block had a history of strange disturbances tied to an older missing person case. They referenced a rumor about a renter who vanished, and they insisted the door scratches were a warning. Investigators never confirmed that rumor, and Mara couldn't find a matching missing person entry by address. Records conflict on whether any disappearance happened within Ashland city limits during that period. Still, the rumor spread faster than the documents could follow. Caleb tried to isolate variables the way dispatch training taught him during wildfire seasons. He tracked weather, moon phase, weekend nights, and traffic noise from the nearby roadway. He noticed scratches were more likely after heavy rain, when the porch wood swelled and the latch felt tighter. He also noticed a faint chemical smell on those nights, like solvent or fresh paint. The landlord denied painting anything, and neighbors said they hadn't used chemicals outside. One night in early November, Caleb set the camera to continuous recording for 4 hours. He sat in the dark living room with a flashlight and waited, keeping his phone on silent. At 2:48 a.m., the scratching started, louder than before, with 2 distinct passes. The camera captured the sound clearly, and it also captured a brief vibration through the door itself. Yet no visible movement appeared in frame, and the porch light stayed steady. Caleb reviewed the audio and compared it to known sounds from his job, like branches against siding. He couldn't match it to wind because the trees outside were still and the forecast recorded low gusts. He couldn't match it to animals because no paw taps or scurrying followed the scrape. He sent the clip to Mara and asked if she heard anything that suggested tools. Mara replied that it sounded like something dragging across painted wood, but she wouldn't guess what. The next day, Mara checked a contractor database and found a door company had worked at that duplex before. The invoice listed a replacement door ordered in 2011 with a note about recurring damage. The contractor's archived notes mentioned gouges appearing even after hardware upgrades. The notes didn't mention an intruder or an animal, only the word recurring. Mara couldn't contact the contractor because the business had closed and the phone number no longer worked. Caleb added a second camera outside, mounted under the eaves with the landlord's reluctant permission. He aimed it at the porch steps and the walkway, and he adjusted sensitivity to catch small movement. For 3 nights, the camera captured cats, raccoons, and one late delivery driver turning around. On the 4th night, it triggered at 2:19 a.m. The clip showed an empty porch, then the audio captured the scratch, and a light haze drifted through frame. The haze looked like fog, but fog usually rolled across the yard, not through a still porch space. Some viewers claimed it resembled cigarette smoke, and others said it was an insect close to the lens. Caleb checked meteorological records and found no report of fog in Ashland at that hour. He checked the lens for spiderwebs and found none. He didn't conclude anything, but he saved the file under a new folder labeled Anomalies, then regretted the label later. Mara warned him that labeling could bias his thinking, and she encouraged neutral categories. Caleb renamed the folder with dates instead, and he kept his written notes strictly descriptive. Around then, Caleb received an email from the county records office about an older complaint. The message referenced a prior tenant who claimed someone tried to mimic keys in the lock, but the report lacked follow-up. The final line said no evidence was located, and the case was closed as unfounded. Caleb wondered if he had inherited a pattern of prank behavior that targeted renters. He spoke to 2 neighbors, a retired nurse and a graduate student, and both said they'd heard scratching once or twice. Neither neighbor had called police, and neither neighbor had checked the porch afterward. One neighbor said it might be branches, even though no branches reached the door. Another neighbor said it might be pipes settling, even though the sound came from outside. Their uncertainty made Caleb feel less isolated and more unsettled. In mid-November, Deputy Kolesh returned after another call, and this time he brought a small flashlight with a UV filter. He said it was unofficial, something he used for checking graffiti and tampering. Kolsch examined the door and porch rail, then paused at the lower edge of the frame. Under UV light, faint streaks appeared near the scratches, like residue from a glove or oily cloth. Kolesh reportedly noted it in his pocket notebook, but it never appeared in the formal dispatch summary. Kolsch suggested the residue could be from routine cleaning products or from someone touching the door after smoking. Caleb asked if the residue could be traced, and Kolesh said lab testing required a clear crime and a cooperating victim. Caleb wanted to push further, but he didn't have a burglary, an assault, or a witness. He had sound, marks, and inconsistent records, which rarely triggered deeper investigation. Kolsch advised Caleb to document and consider a temporary stay elsewhere if anxiety grew worse. Caleb didn't leave, partly because his work schedule made moving difficult, and partly because leaving felt like conceding to something undefined. He bought a metal kickplate and installed it across the lower half of the door. The next scratch happened 3 days later, and the sound changed, sharper and faster. In the morning, the kickplate had thin lines across it as if something hard scraped metal. Caleb checked screws and found one loosened, though he couldn't prove it was from tampering. Mara returned with a handheld sound meter, hoping to compare frequency patterns. She stood inside while Caleb waited outside. Then they reversed positions. The scratch did not occur during their test, which made the equipment feel pointless. Mara admitted that intermittent events rarely cooperate with controlled experiments. She suggested looking at the broader timeline, including when prior tenants left and whether disputes occurred. Caleb requested lease history from the landlord, and the landlord refused, citing privacy and liability. Mara then searched civil court listings for landlord-tenant disputes linked to that owner. She found a small claims case from 2017 involving withheld deposit and alleged property damage. The case summary referenced a door replacement, but it didn't specify the cause. The tenant claimed the door had been damaged repeatedly, and the landlord claimed the tenant caused it. The judge's notes were brief and neutral, and the case settled without clear findings. As November turned colder, Caleb noticed the scratching sometimes coincided with brief power dips. The porch bulb flickered once, then steadied, and the scratch followed within minutes. Utility outage logs showed minor fluctuations in the area, but they were common during storms. Caleb couldn't link the dips directly to the scratches, but the timing bothered him. Some locals claimed the neighborhood transformer was cursed, a joke that still carried an edge. Caleb wrote down the outage times anyway because logs were his language. On Thanksgiving week, Caleb returned from a late shift and found a new set of marks higher on the door, close to the peephole. He also found a single muddy print on the porch, half smeared, with no matching second print. The print shape was unclear, and the edges blurred as if someone stepped, then twisted. Caleb photographed it, then watched it fade as the porch dried. Mara later said the print could be from a shoe that slipped, but there was no trail leading away. Caleb finally installed a doorbell camera with cloud storage and a wider angle view. The first few nights captured passing cars and occasional pedestrians, nothing that reached the steps. Then, on December 3rd, the camera recorded at 2:06 a.m. The clip showed a still porch, then a sudden close-up blur near the lens, like something brushed it. Immediately after, the scratching sound occurred, and the image froze for 2 seconds before returning. The service provider later attributed the freeze to bandwidth fluctuation, which did not satisfy Caleb. Mara reviewed that clip and noted something else, a faint reflection in the door window. The reflection appeared for one frame and resembled a light source moving low to the ground. It could have been a passing car, or a phone screen, or a glitch from compression. Mara refused to declare it a person, and she refused to declare it nothing. She advised Caleb to focus on what could be verified, like the repeated damage and the time window. Caleb agreed, but he also felt the time window tightening like a trap. In mid-December, Caleb requested a welfare check on himself through dispatch protocols, hoping it would create a formal trail. That request reportedly generated a new entry in dispatch logs, describing an occupant concerned about unknown tampering. Deputy Kolesh responded again, and he walked the perimeter with more care than before. Behind the trash bins, he found a broken piece of plastic consistent with a disposable utility blade cover. Kolesh bagged it, then later said it was probably litter because there were no fingerprints and no crime report attached. Caleb started sleeping at a friend's house on nights he felt too exhausted to stay alert. During his absence, the door scratches reportedly still occurred, according to the neighbor nurse. The neighbor said she heard scraping, then saw no one through her blinds. She didn't record it, and she didn't go outside because she didn't want trouble. Caleb returned the next morning and found fresh marks on the metal kickplate again. That detail made him consider that the event didn't depend on his presence, or at least not entirely. Mara found one more document that changed how Caleb framed the problem. It was a maintenance request from 2009, scanned into a property file and labeled unclear. The tenant wrote that the door sounded like it was being tested at night, and that scratches appeared even after sanding. The tenant also wrote that a back window had been unlatched, though no entry was confirmed. Investigators never confirmed those claims, but the phrasing matched Caleb's neutral descriptions. Mara said similarity could indicate suggestion, yet Caleb had not seen that file before his own notes existed. By late December, Caleb decided to end the lease early, accepting the financial penalty to regain sleep. He packed during daylight, moved his essentials, and left the duplex mostly empty. On his last night, he returned to retrieve a few boxes, and he stood in the hallway listening. At 2:31 a.m., the scratch came again, slower than usual, almost careful. Caleb watched the doorbell camera feed on his phone, and he saw nothing on the porch. He didn't open the door, and he didn't call the deputy, because he wanted the final record to remain unembellished. In the morning, Caleb took one last photograph of the door, then handed the keys to the landlord. The landlord said he'd replace the door again, and he asked Caleb not to mention the scratches to future applicants. Mara later documented her involvement in a personal memo, noting that records, conflict, and explanations remained ordinary but incomplete. Dispatch logs, state records, and archived notes supported recurring complaints, but they never established a single cause. Some locals claimed it was paranormal, investigators never confirmed that, and the only confirmed truth was the door kept getting scratched. Next story. Hollow smile. In late 2019, a quiet set of calls started clustering around an old riverside park in Dayton, Ohio, and nobody agreed why. Marcus Dale was 34, a night security contractor hired to watch a small construction yard beside the Great Miami River. He took the job for steady pay and predictable hours since his previous contract ended without warning that summer. The site sat near Deeds Point, where trails cut through trees and the river carried sound far after midnight. On his first week, he logged small things, padlock scratches, boot prints, and a sweet chemical smell near the fence. Nothing was stolen, yet every morning the same detail returned: a chalky smile drawn on plywood facing the water. Marcus photographed it and emailed his supervisor, who replied that teenagers had been drifting through for months, reportedly. Dispatch logs later showed the first related call came on August 17, 2019, listed as suspicious person near the trailhead. Officers found nobody, but they noted a white plastic mask in the grass, wiped clean and left upright like it was watching. Some locals claimed it was a prank linked to an online dare, while others insisted the river carried a curse from older drownings. Investigators never confirmed either story, and state records showed no formal incident report attached to that call number. Marcus did not care about legends, but he cared about patterns, and the pattern was starting to feel deliberate. On September 3, 2019, he arrived at 10:58 p.m. and found the gate chain threaded through itself, then tightened hard. It was the kind of knot that wasted time, forcing him to cut and replace it, which his client billed as damage. He walked the perimeter with a flashlight, counted fresh cigarette ends, and heard a soft tapping from the riverside. At the shoreline, he saw the smile again, now carved into wet sand, wide and shallow, as if drawn with a stick. He radioed the non-emergency line, then waited with his back to the fence, trying to keep the river in view. The responding unit noted nothing unusual, yet the officer asked Marcus whether he had noticed the face in the water before. Marcus said no, and the officer did not explain, only glanced toward the current and wrote for a long time in silence. 2 days later, a woman named Eliza Hart drove down from Columbus, 29, a graduate research assistant studying urban folklore and rumor cycles. She said she was gathering accounts for a seminar project, and Marcus agreed because he wanted someone else documenting details. Eliza had read archived notes from a retired park ranger describing a recurring grin symbol tagged under bridges since 2011. The ranger wrote that complaints surged whenever the river ran high, though records conflict on whether the tags appeared before storms. Eliza asked Marcus to walk her along the path after his shift started, and he insisted they stay within sight of the lights. She accepted, then described how symbols like that can spread, carried by fear more than fact, reportedly. Marcus listened without reacting, but he noticed her hands tremble whenever the trail turned toward darker brush near the riverbank. Near a bench, they found a small pile of river stones arranged like teeth and a cracked mirror facing the path. Eliza photographed it, then said some locals claimed mirrors were used to trap bad luck, though investigators never confirmed such rituals. Marcus kicked dirt over the mirror and moved on, because sharp glass and public trails are a simple liability risk. That night, at 1:14 a.m., Marcus's camera feed glitched on one frame, and the next frame showed the plywood smile painted over black. He replayed it again and again, but the gap stayed the same, exactly 11 seconds missing from the recording block. He checked the device, found no tamper alert, and saw no power drop in the system history. Dispatch logs show he called it in at 1:22 a.m., describing possible sabotage and requesting a patrol pass by the gate. The patrol arrived at 1:47 a.m., and the officer wrote that the air smelled like solvent near the plywood panel. No suspect was found, yet a second unit noted faint footprints leading toward the river, then stopping at the mudline. The officer joked that the river swallowed them, but his tone changed when Marcus asked to see the footprints himself. Marcus walked there with them and saw the prints end sharply, as if someone stepped onto something smooth, then vanished. The next morning, Eliza sent Marcus a message with a scan from a county file from 2009 about an unclaimed body recovered downstream. The file described the victim as unidentified, adult male, with dental work, but no match in the database at the time. What caught Eliza's attention was a line about a theatrical mask found nearby, white plastic with a smiling mouth, and no fingerprints recovered. State records show that evidence entry exists, yet a later inventory list does not include the mask, and records conflict on its disposal. Eliza wrote that missing items often have normal explanations, but she asked Marcus whether the mask in the grass matched the older description. Marcus said it did, and he hated how quickly that answer made the story feel older than his job. He considered quitting, but the contract paid weekly, and he had rent due on a small apartment across town. On September 18, 2019, the construction crew reported fresh scratches on a stored excavator and a smile etched into the seat vinyl. Marcus inspected it and found the cuts were careful, not random slashes like someone traced a template in dim light. He pulled his camera timestamps and saw nothing, which meant either the cameras missed the angle or somebody knew exactly where they looked. That afternoon, Marcus met Eliza at a coffee shop in the Oregon District, and she brought printed screenshots of old forum posts. The post described a figure called the Grinner, but the writers disagreed on details, and some claimed it was a way to scare kids home. Eliza warned Marcus that attention can feed hoaxes, yet she also admitted the gaps in documentation bothered her more than rumors. She said archived notes mentioned a man in a reflective vest who offered directions, then vanished when people turned around. Marcus kept his face neutral, but he remembered the officer's earlier comment about a face in the water, and he felt irritated by coincidence. He returned to work that night with a new plan: stay inside the lit zone, log every sound, and avoid chasing shadows near the river. At 12:36 a.m., he heard a slow clapping from the trail, spaced out like someone keeping time, then stopping whenever he moved. He watched the camera monitor and saw a pale oval appear near the fence line, motionless, then tilt slightly toward the plywood panel. Marcus zoomed the feed and saw it was a mask propped on a stick planted in the ground facing the site like a warning sign. He called it in, and dispatch logs show the operator asked whether he felt threatened, and Marcus answered that he felt watched, reportedly. Officers arrived and removed the stick, but one officer quietly asked Marcus if the mask smelled like river mud or like cleaning chemicals. Marcus said it smelled clean, and the officer muttered that was the part he did not like, then refused to elaborate further. After the patrol left, Marcus walked the fence line and found a handwritten note folded under a rock, damp but readable. It said only one sentence, "Keep your face open," and the handwriting looked careful, rounded, almost like a child practicing letters. Marcus bagged it and marked the time because he knew paper evidence matters more than stories told later by stressed people. 2 days later, he delivered the note to a station clerk, and the clerk said evidence intake was closed, then suggested Marcus come back Monday. Marcus asked for a receipt, and the clerk finally logged it as found property, which later made it hard to trace in state records. Eliza tried to request the item through a records inquiry, but the response she received said no matching property entry existed under that date. Records conflict again there, and investigators never confirmed whether the note was misplaced, misfiled, or quietly discarded as nonsense. On October 6, 2019, the weather shifted and the river rose after heavy rain upstream, pushing debris into the banks. That night, Marcus found the plywood panel replaced, even though the crew had not scheduled any new material delivery for that week. The new sheet was clean, unmarked, but the smell of fresh paint hung around it, and the nails were driven too neatly. Marcus checked the site inventory, then called his supervisor, who said no replacement was authorized, and told Marcus to document everything. Marcus took photos, then noticed something carved into the backside of the plywood, a shallow smile hidden where casual eyes would miss it. He felt a flash of anger, because whoever did it understood procedures and knew where guards tend to look first. Eliza came down again the next day, and Marcus showed her the hidden carving while keeping his voice flat and controlled. She traced the grooves with a gloved finger and said the cuts looked older than the board, which made no sense given the wood's new edges. She suggested the board might not be new at all, only cleaned and reinstalled, which would fit with the chemical odor in dispatch logs. Eliza said county file from 2009 mentioned a salvaged panel found near a flood line tagged with similar marks before storage. Marcus asked how a stored panel from a decade earlier ended up on his site, and Eliza admitted she had no proven chain of custody. That evening, Marcus found himself scanning faces in passing cars, then hating himself for acting like a man inside a rumor spiral. He stuck to his rules, stayed calm, wrote down times, and refused to chase any sound that pulled him toward the waterline. At 2 a.m., his radio hissed once. Then a faint voice came through, sounding like his own name, though the channel was secure. He checked the settings and saw no cross-traffic, and the system log showed no incoming call, only a brief spike in static. Marcus wrote it down anyway because uncertainty belongs on paper when memories start reshaping themselves after stress and lost sleep. The following week, a jogger reported a man standing under the bridge near the park wearing a reflective vest and holding a white object. Dispatch logs show the caller said the man smiled too long, then turned his head slowly like a mannequin shifting position. Officers arrived and found only a reflective vest draped over a guardrail, clean and dry despite mist, with no tags inside. Some locals claimed the vest belonged to a missing maintenance worker, while others said it was staged to bait responders into the dark. Investigators never confirmed a missing worker linked to that vest, and state records show no active missing person case tied to park staff. Marcus heard about the call from a patrol officer, and he noticed the officer avoided eye contact while describing the scene, reportedly. Eliza asked Marcus if the rumors were changing his behavior, and Marcus said only that he slept less and double-checked locks more. She told him that fear often makes witnesses align their stories, yet here the details kept diverging, which she found worse. She shared archived notes about conflicting witness claims, where one person described a grin on a mask and another described a grin on a face. Marcus said faces and masks blur at night, especially near water reflections, and he refused to add anything beyond what he saw on camera. On October 28, 2019, Marcus's client requested extra patrols after someone left teeth on the ground, small, clean, and arranged in a line. The responding officer wrote that they were animal teeth, likely from a raccoon, yet the arrangement looked intentional and too symmetrical. Marcus photographed them beside a ruler, then noticed faint paint drops leading toward the trail, spaced as if someone walked carefully. He followed only as far as the lit edge, and he saw a smear on a tree, a curved line that could be a smile or a simple brushstroke. He stopped there because the brush beyond swallowed light, and he knew a guard alone has no reason to become a story himself. Later, Eliza pulled weather data and found that each cluster of calls lined up with high water, though the correlation was imperfect. Records conflict on the first appearance of the symbol, but the strongest pattern sat around seasonal floods and late-night trail traffic. Eliza suggested a person might be using flood debris to stage scenes, borrowing driftwood, old boards, and recovered objects to build continuity. Marcus agreed that explanation was human and practical, yet it still left one question. Why was the person so focused on smiles? Eliza said smiles can be forced, and forced smiles make people uneasy because they mimic safety while signaling control, reportedly. Marcus did not respond, but he remembered the note telling him to keep his face open, and he felt his jaw tighten. In early November, Marcus requested a second camera angle from his supervisor, and the request was approved after a client complaint. The new camera faced the river, catching the trail entry and a strip of shoreline, and Marcus hoped it would kill the mystery fast. On November 9, 2019, at 1:33 a.m., the river camera captured a figure standing still at the water's edge for 4 minutes. The figure wore a light-colored hood, and the face was bright, but the image was too grainy to confirm whether it was skin or plastic. Then the figure lifted an arm and placed something on the ground, and the feed flickered once, though it did not cut out entirely. When Marcus reviewed it, he saw the object remained after the figure walked away, a white oval resting upright, facing the camera. Marcus called patrol and waited inside the fence, refusing to approach, while the object sat there like it had been posed for evidence photos. Officers retrieved it and found it was a mask, but its surface was scuffed as if dragged through gravel, and the inside smelled like river silt. One officer noted the mouth had been altered, widened with a blade, then sanded smooth, which matched the neat cuts Marcus had seen before. State records later listed the mask as collected, yet Eliza's later request returned a response saying the item could not be located. Records conflict again, and investigators never confirmed whether the mask was lost, destroyed, or kept outside standard storage procedures. After that night, the calls slowed, and the plywood smiles stopped appearing, leaving Marcus with empty shifts and a restless mind. He thought that meant the person moved on, but Eliza warned him that quiet can mean attention shifted to a new target nearby. Marcus finished his contract in late November and took a different job in Cincinnati, telling himself the river story belonged to the park now. Eliza kept collecting accounts, and she wrote that the Grinner myth declined online, replaced by newer rumors that borrowed the same Grin imagery. In a final email, she said archived notes suggested this pattern had happened before, cycles of symbols flaring, then fading, then returning years later. Marcus did not reply, but he saved the message, because he had learned that the worst part was not fear. It was unresolved documentation. In March 2020, a short entry surfaced in a local bulletin. A hiker found a stack of cleaned river stones shaped like teeth near the same bench. Dispatch logs show a brief response, no suspect, and a note that the scene looked staged, yet harmless, and not worth extended resources. Some locals claimed the smile was back, while others said bored people were reviving an old story for attention, reportedly. Investigators never confirmed a single person behind it, and state records showed no arrests, no charges, and no official link to the 2009 file. What remains is a trail of partial reports, missing evidence entries, and conflicting witness descriptions that never align long enough to settle cleanly. Next story. The Lullaby. In Asheville, North Carolina, dispatchers kept logging the same detail, a lullaby heard behind desperate calls that never stayed connected. In 2019, Daniel Cross was 32 and worked as a county paramedic, assigned nights because he stayed calm under pressure. He was called to Buncombe County's eastern edge after reportedly hearing a child singing through a deadline on the ambulance radio. Dispatch logs show the time as 2:17 a.m., and the caller ID field was blank, like it often is. Daniel drove with Maya Henson, 29, a sheriff's deputy on ride-along duty for a training rotation that week. Their goal was simple: locate the source and confirm whether anyone needed help near a closed daycare property. State records list the building as shuttered since 2011 after repeated code violations and a licensing dispute. The property sat near a tree line outside town, and no address number was visible from the road that night. Maya's body camera later captured only wind and gravel, but her mic also picked up a thin melody under the static. Some locals claimed the lullaby was always there, and they said it drifted across the valley after midnight during rain. Investigators never confirmed that pattern because weather reports and later calls did not line up consistently. Daniel walked the perimeter with a flashlight while Maya checked doors, and both noted fresh footprints near the loading ramp. The prints were small, but records conflict on whether they matched a child's shoe or a narrow adult boot. Archive notes from the sheriff's office mention a similar report in 2009 filed as trespassing with no suspect. That county file from 2009 also describes a lullaby heard on an answering machine, reportedly recorded by a caretaker. The caretaker's tape was never found, and the notes say it may have been discarded during a move years later. Maya radioed for a second unit, but her transmission clipped out twice, as if the channel was briefly overridden. When the line returned, a dispatcher asked if she had music playing, because the console monitor showed unusual audio peaks. Maya answered no, and Daniel confirmed the ambulance cabin was silent, with their phones in airplane mode per policy. They entered through a side door that had been pried, and the smell inside was damp drywall and old detergent. Flashlight beams swept over toddler cots stacked against a wall, and a small plastic piano sat upright on a low shelf. Daniel said the piano keys were dusty except for 3, and the dust looked disturbed in a way that suggested recent touch. Maya photographed the keys in the floor, then noted a single wet footprint leading toward the kitchen corridor. On the audio of her camera, the lullaby becomes clearer for 8 seconds, then fades as if the source moved away. Daniel followed the corridor and found a maintenance hatch open, revealing a crawl space with insulation torn in strips. He reported hearing breathing, but later interviews show he could not say whether it was a person or airflow. Maya called out that they were law enforcement, and her voice echoed back with a delay that sounded oddly rhythmic. She later told an investigator the rhythm matched the lullaby's tempo, though she admitted stress can distort perception. A second deputy arrived and searched the crawl space, finding only a portable speaker with corroded batteries and no power. The speaker's brand label was missing, but a serial sticker remained, and state records show it was sold in 2015. No one could explain why it was placed in the crawl space or why it appeared staged beneath loose insulation. Daniel checked nearby rooms and noticed a bulletin board still mounted, covered with faded schedules and nap time charts. One paper listed lullaby time in thick marker, but investigators noted that could be routine for any daycare. The unsettling part was the handwritten date, which reportedly read 2019, even though the ink looked older. Records conflict on that detail because the photo of the paper was blurry and later scans show only partial digits. The team bagged the paper anyway, and the county lab found no readable fingerprints due to moisture and surface damage. When they left the building, Daniel's ambulance radio briefly played the lullaby again, at a low volume behind static. He shut the radio off, and the melody continued for a moment, which he later described as a lingering echo in his ears. A medical supervisor suggested auditory pareidolia, but Daniel reportedly insisted it sounded external and directional at first. In the following weeks, dispatchers filed 3 more reports, each involving a dropped call with a childlike tune. Dispatch logs show those calls routed through different towers, and the GPS pings clustered around Asheville's outskirts. Investigators checked tower maintenance notes and found one contractor report about interference, but it listed no audio content. Maya requested archive notes from neighboring counties, and one report from Henderson County mentioned a similar melody in 2016. That report was marked unverified, and the deputy who wrote it retired, leaving no follow-up interview in the file. Daniel began carrying a small digital recorder, hoping to capture what he kept hearing during quiet stretches on overnight standby. He recorded static bursts and engine noise, but one clip reportedly contains a few clean notes matching a common lullaby scale. County analysts said the clip was too short to identify a song, and they warned it could be incidental radio bleed-through. Some locals claimed a missing child case from 2011 was tied to that daycare, but investigators never confirmed that link. State records show a licensing shutdown, yet no public record lists a disappearance at that specific property during that year. A retired social worker in Asheville told Maya that parents once complained of strange phone calls, but she offered no documentation. Maya wrote in her report that the story sounded like rumor, though she noted the caller knew staff names accurately. In 2020, Daniel responded to a welfare check after a neighbor heard singing from a vacant rental near the French Broad River. He arrived with Maya again, now assigned permanently to night patrol, and they found the home unlocked with lights off. Inside, a child's music box sat on the kitchen counter, still wound, though no one was present and the house was empty. The music was a lullaby pattern, but the neighbor later said what he heard was a voice, not a music box. Records conflict because the body camera audio captured only the music box, while the neighbor's phone video was muffled. A county evidence note says the music box was mass-produced and sold widely, offering no unique trace beyond a store barcode. Daniel asked the property manager, who said no tenants had lived there for months and the box was not left behind. When Maya checked the crawl space beneath the rental, she found another portable speaker, newer, with fresh batteries and no fingerprints. This time, there was a handwritten tag attached, and it contained only 2 words: "Sing back." Maya wrote that the tag suggested a prank or coercion attempt, yet no suspect was found and no similar tags appeared later. Daniel's recorder captured a faint childlike hum outside the house, but wind noise makes the clip hard to evaluate cleanly. An audio engineer consulted by the county said the hum could be a person at distance or could be a tone artifact from compression. Still, Daniel reported feeling watched from the tree line, and Maya noted fresh cigarette ash near a fence post. No matching cigarettes were recovered, and rain washed most of the ground, limiting what technicians could reliably preserve. In 2021, Daniel transferred to day shift, and the lullaby reports dropped, though dispatchers say they never stopped entirely. Archived notes show at least 2 later calls with similar audio, but the county file lists them as unconfirmed interference. Maya requested the full communications archive, and she noticed the lullaby appeared most often when callers whispered first. Investigators never confirmed a pattern because some calls were silent from the start, and others included shouting or traffic. A final entry in the county file from 2009 was added as an appendix, stating that old reports were being consolidated. It included one sentence saying a tape existed at some point and that it allegedly held a lullaby with a second voice underneath. No one could produce the tape, and state records show the caretaker died in 2018 with no listed next of kin. The official conclusion remained mundane: interference and pranks, yet the file was kept open because the calls never fully ended. Daniel never claimed to see anything impossible, and Maya never wrote the word paranormal, but both kept the recorder batteries fresh. Years later, a dispatcher told a journalist that on certain nights the lullaby returns, softly, just long enough to make everyone listen. Next story: The Whisper. In late October, residents around Asheville, North Carolina, started calling 911 about a voice in the dark, reportedly near Bent Creek. Dispatch logs show callers describing a whisper that used their names, then went silent as they approached. Investigators never confirmed a source, yet the county file from 2009 references similar reports in the same ridge. What followed looked less like a ghost story and more like a paper trail that refused to agree with itself. Ethan Cole was 34, a paramedic with Buncombe County, and he drove that corridor after night shifts to clear his head. He told coworkers he liked the quiet overlooks because traffic thinned and the radio reception sometimes improved. On October 28, he pulled off near a trail access point, intending to eat and then head home. State records show his unit was off-duty, yet his radio later keyed on for 7 seconds without any voice recorded. He would describe hearing a low whisper through the cracked window, like someone speaking from the passenger seat. Maya Hart was 29, a county archives technician, and she had been cataloging old incident binders from the sheriff's office. Her job was simple: digitize, label, and cross-reference anything that matched open public requests. Archive notes from 2009 included several pages titled Bent Creek Complaints, with redacted names and uneven timestamps. Some locals claimed the ridge carried voices at night, though investigators never confirmed any pattern beyond repeat callers. Maya flagged the file because it mentioned a disused communication structure not far from a service road. 2 days after Ethan's report surfaced on the scanner, she asked the department for access to the modern case folder. Deputy Shane Willard was 41, Patrol Division, and he had responded to noise calls in that area for years. He agreed to meet Maya at the substation because he did not like civilians wandering near closed gates. Reportedly, he told her the whisper calls were usually teenagers or hikers with too much imagination after dark. Dispatch logs conflict with that confidence, showing at least 6 calls that came from middle-aged residents with stable histories. Shane's goal was to close the reports quickly because a rash of trail thefts was already stretching the unit. Still, he opened the folder and found a detail that bothered him. The calls were clustered within minutes of one another, across different cell towers. On the night Ethan stopped near Bent Creek, he stayed in his car with the engine off, listening to the cooling ticks. He later told Shane the whisper sounded like breathing words, not loud enough to fully parse, but close enough to feel directed. Ethan said he answered once because he thought a stranded hiker might be outside and he did not want to ignore someone in trouble. According to his statement, the whisper responded with a single phrase that resembled his last name, then faded. Investigators never confirmed that audio existed because Ethan's phone had no recording running and his body mic was in his locker. In the county file from 2009, a witness described the same habit, a voice that sharpened only when someone spoke back. Maya compared the 2009 binder to current dispatch logs, and she noticed irregular labeling in the older material. One page referenced a state forestry crew that allegedly inspected a tower platform, yet state records show no such work order. Another page claimed a hiker vanished for 3 hours, then reappeared at a trailhead, confused and dehydrated. Archive notes list that hiker's name, but county file indexing later omitted it, as if the report was never meant to surface. Maya did not read these pages as proof of anything supernatural because the paperwork itself looked sloppy and copied. Still, the repetition of details kept showing up: the whisper, the ridge, and a short stretch of service road. She asked Shane if they could visit in daylight to document the site and rule out obvious sources. They drove out on November 1, just after noon, when the trails were busy and the air was clear. Shane carried a standard noise meter and a handheld radio, mostly to demonstrate that routine equipment could explain it. Ethan came along because he wanted to know if he had imagined the whole thing after a hard shift. Their stated purpose was simple: locate the old structure referenced in records, then photograph it for the file. The road climbed through mixed forest, and they passed occasional hikers who barely looked up. Near a fenced pull-off, they found a faded warning sign, and beyond it, a narrow track leading to a rusted platform. No addresses were involved, just public land boundaries and a gate that had been bent once, then repaired. The structure was not a classic tower, more like a metal frame that once held a repeater and a dish. Shane noted that wind could whistle through the braces, and he pointed out several loose panels. Ethan stood quietly, scanning the woods, and he told Maya the place felt too open for a whisper to hide. Maya photographed old cable runs and a concrete pad, then compared them to archived notes. The 2009 binder referenced a generator shed, yet there was no shed, only stains where something had sat. State records show the communications lease ended years earlier, but no one could confirm when the equipment was removed. That gap mattered because it left room for anything from theft to informal reuse by unknown parties. Shane performed a radio check while Maya stood 50 feet away, and Ethan watched from the car. On the first test, the radio was clear, and the meter read normal background levels for a breezy ridge. On the second test, the handheld caught a burst of interference, and Shane frowned as the speaker hissed. Reportedly, the interference included a faint syllable, yet the recording function on the device was disabled. Ethan said the sound matched what he heard at night, not words exactly, but shaped like speech. Investigators never confirmed that moment because the only proof was their reactions and Maya's notes. In the county file from 2009, a deputy wrote that radio static sounded like a woman whispering, then added that it was probably atmospheric noise. Back at the substation, Maya requested cell tower pings for the recent 911 calls, expecting a tight cluster. Dispatch logs showed something stranger. The calls originated from different sectors, as if the callers were moving quickly. One caller, a nurse from Arden, described a whisper that said, "Don't look back," then laughed softly. Another caller, a retiree from West Asheville, claimed the whisper mimicked his wife's voice, yet his wife was asleep at home. Investigators never confirmed whether callers influenced each other because local Facebook posts spread the story between reports. The file notes include a caution about confirmation bias, written by a supervisor who wanted to avoid panic. Still, the pattern of timing kept repeating. Multiple calls within a 10-minute window, then nothing for hours. Ethan began checking his own habits, looking for reasons his mind could have manufactured the sound. He had worked a double shift that week, and fatigue can play tricks, especially in quiet places after adrenaline crashes. Yet he kept returning to one detail. His name, or something close to it, had emerged from the whisper. He told Shane he never used his name on the phone at the pull-off, and he had not posted his location online. Maya asked him whether the scanner could have carried a prior transmission, but his unit was silent at that moment. State records show no active calls in his zone during that minute, which made the name detail harder to dismiss. Investigators never confirmed the exact wording because Ethan's memory shifted slightly between retellings, and those shifts are common in stressful recall. Maya then dug into the tower lease history, using state records and an old county procurement log. The leaseholder had been a small communications subcontractor, absorbed later by a regional firm that no longer kept the same archives. Archive notes in 2009 mention a complaint about men with flashlights near the platform, but the names were redacted. Some locals claim the ridge was used for clandestine meetings, though investigators never confirmed any organized group. Maya found a handwritten margin note that read, "Check Old Forestry Channel," which suggested a radio frequency link. She asked Shane if they could run a controlled test at night with clear documentation and multiple recorders. Shane hesitated, but he agreed because the calls were escalating and he needed a credible explanation for the report. They returned on November 6, just after 9, when the trails were mostly empty and the temperature had dropped. Ethan sat in his car again because that matched the original conditions, and Maya placed an audio recorder on the dashboard. Shane parked behind them, lights off, and he kept his body camera running to capture ambient sound. Their goal was documentation, not confrontation, and they agreed not to wander into the woods. For 20 minutes, there was only wind, a distant highway hum, and an occasional branch tapping metal. Then Maya's recorder picked up a faint hiss that rose and fell, and Ethan stiffened in the driver's seat. Dispatch logs later note that a 911 call came in at that same time from a separate location, reporting the whisper again. Ethan said the whisper started like a breath against glass, then formed something resembling a sentence. He described it as low and close, yet when he turned his head, there was nothing in the windows. Shane heard nothing at first, but he noticed his radio squelch open without a transmission tone. Maya watched levels on her recorder, and she saw a narrow spike, as if a short signal had entered the microphone. Reportedly, she mouthed the words, "Did you hear that?" But she did not speak aloud, trying not to contaminate the audio. After 8 seconds, the sound stopped, and the air returned to ordinary night noise. Investigators never confirmed the content because the playback was unclear, and each listener heard different syllables when they tried to interpret it. Maya labeled the clip and compared it to the older binder notes, looking for technical parallels rather than eerie narratives. The 2009 file mentioned a phenomenon called cross-modulation, where nearby transmitters can leak into audio equipment. State records show a weather station and a public safety repeater both operated in the wider region during that era. Shane contacted a technician from the county radio shop who agreed to review the clip and the site conditions. The technician reportedly suggested that a loose ground or corroded connector could create voices from overlapping signals. That explanation was mundane, yet it did not fit one key report. Callers claimed the whisper used personal details, like names and private phrases. Investigators never confirmed those details independently because none of the callers had recorded the whisper in a clean way. The next day, Shane pulled a list of repeat callers and noticed 2 names that appeared in 2009 and in the current year. One was a man who had been 19 then, now 36, and he lived in the same zip code. The other was a woman who had been a college student then, now a school administrator, with no history of false reporting. Both told Shane they avoided talking about the whisper publicly because they did not want to be labeled unstable. The man said the whisper once said his brother's nickname, a nickname never used on social media. The woman said it copied her mother's voice, and her mother died years earlier, which made the memory feel intrusive. Investigators never confirmed whether these were true details or reconstructed feelings, because grief and stress can blend sound with meaning in recollection. Maya also found that the older binder contained one page that did not match the rest of the handwriting. It described a teen trespasser who confessed to hiding a speaker near the platform, then playing recorded whispers to scare hikers. Dispatch logs from 2009 do not show an arrest tied to that confession, and county file indexing later omitted the page. Records conflict on whether the confession was real or a fabricated entry meant to close the case. Shane tried to locate the teen's name, but the page was partially redacted and the ink had bled. Some locals claimed pranks were common there, especially around Halloween, and that would align with the timing of current calls. Yet the audio clip Maya captured did not sound like a speaker in the woods. It sounded like interference entering the recorder directly. On November 9, a new report came from a jogger who said the whisper followed him along the road, keeping pace. He claimed he heard it from different directions as he ran, which suggested multiple sources, or shifting perception. Dispatch logs show he was calm, providing landmarks and describing his breathing, and he stayed on the line for 11 minutes. Shane drove out and found the jogger waiting under a streetlight, pale and angry, not hysterical. The jogger said the whisper told him to stop running, then said his first name twice. Investigators never confirmed how a stranger could know his name, but the jogger admitted his name was printed on a reflective armband. That detail mattered, because it showed how easy it is for a human observer to seem omniscient at night. Shane then considered a more ordinary threat, someone lurking near the trail access, targeting isolated people. He requested extra patrols and asked park staff about recent complaints, but archive notes from their side were sparse. State records show no registered events at the site and no scheduled maintenance that would explain unfamiliar vehicles. Maya suggested they look for hidden speakers or cameras, yet she also cautioned against assuming intent without proof. Ethan, who had seen real predators during emergency calls, supported the idea of a human source. Their plan shifted toward observation, return quietly, watch the pull off, and document any vehicles or footsteps. Investigators never confirmed a suspect, but they treated the whispers as a safety issue, not a ghost story. That approach changed how they listened, focusing on patterns, angles, and distance cues rather than fear. On November 12, they set up in separate cars, spaced along the road with radios on low volume. Maya stayed closer to the gate, Ethan watched the pull-off, and Shane positioned farther downhill for coverage. The night was calm, with almost no wind, and the silence made small noises feel oversized. Around 10:14, Ethan texted that he heard something, then he added that it sounded like a whisper inside his own vehicle. Shane rolled forward slowly, scanning mirrors and tree lines, while Maya watched her recorder levels. At 10:16, Maya's recorder captured a faint burst again, and her screen showed a brief spike similar to the earlier clip. Dispatch logs show no nearby transmissions in that second, which left only two options: unlogged radio leakage or a source local enough to avoid the system. Ethan later described the whisper as a single word, closer to whispering through teeth than through a speaker. He said it sounded like "listen," but he admitted the vowel shape could have been his mind filling gaps. Shane heard nothing that time, yet his body camera recorded a low hiss that the technician later called inconclusive. Maya noted that the hiss frequency aligned with certain radio artifacts, but alignment is not proof of origin. Investigators never confirmed whether the whisper existed independently of the equipment because human hearing and recording gear do not agree in low-volume noise. The technicians suggested they bring a spectrum analyzer, but the county had limited access and limited staffing for a mystery. Maya proposed a simpler test: turn off all radios, phones, and devices, then sit in silence and see what remained. Shane agreed, though he did not like removing their communication safety net. They tried the device blackout on November 15 earlier in the evening, with another deputy nearby for security. Phones went into airplane mode, radios stayed off, and the cars sat dark, separated by distance. For 30 minutes, there was nothing except distant highway sound and the occasional owl call. Ethan seemed calmer, almost relieved, as if he wanted the whisper to vanish under normal conditions. Then, reportedly, a soft voice came from outside his driver window, low and close, like someone speaking beside the door. Ethan froze, and he refused to turn his head immediately, because he had learned that sudden movement can trigger panic. Shane, positioned uphill, saw no silhouettes, yet he heard a faint sound that he later described as a human exhale. Investigators never confirmed a person was present because the ground was covered with leaves, and footprints were hard to separate from older tracks. After that moment, Ethan did something that later divided the team. He spoke back in a low tone. He said, "Who is there?" and he kept his hands visible, as if a real person might respond. Maya stayed silent, writing timestamps, while Shane moved his flashlight along the tree line without leaving his vehicle. According to Ethan, the whisper replied with two words: "Go home," and then it was gone. Shane heard only the tail of a sound, like air through lips, but not clear syllables. Maya could not confirm content because her recorder was off during the blackout, by design. Dispatch logs show no 911 calls during that minute, which removed the most common confounding factor. Investigators never confirmed whether the whisper was a human prankster close enough to speak or a psychological effect triggered by expectation in a high-tension setup. The next week, Maya filed a formal memo attaching her notes, references to archived notes, and the technician's comments. She wrote that records conflict, but the overlap across years justified continued patrols and technical inspection. Shane added a safety advisory for hikers, encouraging pairs at night and reporting suspicious people, without mentioning whispers. Ethan asked to be removed from the informal stakeouts, not because he believed in anything paranormal, but because the uncertainty was exhausting. In his job, he preferred clear outcomes: a patient stabilized, a scene cleared, a report completed. Here, the evidence did not resolve. It only multiplied into conflicting impressions. Some locals claimed the ridge was cursed, but the department never used that language in any official record. Investigators never confirmed a culprit, which meant the narrative stayed open to whatever people already believed. In December, the radio shop finally obtained a spectrum scan near the platform and found intermittent interference bursts. State records show a legal transmitter operated miles away, but the scan suggested harmonics leaking into the band under certain weather conditions. That finding supported the mundane theory, yet it still failed to explain the personal nature of some reports. Maya reviewed the county file from 2009 again and noticed a line she had missed. One deputy wrote, "Ask about name patches." That line echoed the jogger's reflective armband, a small human detail that can make a whisper feel targeted. Shane interviewed one more caller, a construction foreman, who admitted his name was printed on his hard hat. The foreman said he did not realize it until Shane asked, and his face tightened as if the answer embarrassed him. Investigators never confirmed whether every name report had a similar explanation, but the possibility reduced the mystery without eliminating it. The whisper could be a mix of interference and opportunistic humans, each episode feeding the next report. By January, calls slowed and the file moved toward administrative closure, though it was never marked solved. Maya archived her materials with careful labels because she did not want the case to become another messy binder. Ethan stopped driving that road after night shifts, choosing brighter routes, not out of fear, but out of caution. Shane kept an eye on the pull-off during routine patrols, and he noted fewer parked cars in cold weather. In the final summary, he wrote that the phenomenon was reportedly auditory, inconsistent, and likely influenced by environmental noise and human behavior. That language was precise, cold, and incomplete, which is often the most honest kind of conclusion. Some locals claimed the whisper would return when the leaves came back, though investigators never confirmed any seasonal cycle in records. The only consistent thing was the paperwork itself, a trail of reports that seemed to speak not loudly but persistently from one year to the next.